Poor nations and rich nations. They say that the most powerful bloc in the UN are the African Asian bloc. These are the poor nations. Yet they carry more weight in this political body than the nations do who have all the money. Why? Because no matter how wealthy America is, she only has one vote. No matter how wealthy Russia is, she only has one vote. Whereas all the poor nations in Africa who have just emerged into independence, they have each a vote too. And they stick together and are able to outmaneuver the rich nations. This is by having independence and the right to vote in the political world body, it has enabled the dark nations to band together and use the strength of their ballot to force the wealthy nations, which are the white nations, into giving more independence to other nations who are still under their jurisdiction. You and I have to look at this and understand this, that the ballot is as powerful as the bullet. In the United Nations, you have poor nations and rich nations. They say...
What happened? Welcome to the Gilchrist Experience. As you see, that's Malcolm. It sounds quite profound today. Welcome to the show, Basir and what?
Mchawi.
Mchawi. Welcome to the show, brother.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
That's quite significant hearing Malcolm speak on the ballot of the bullet.
Well, you know, Brother Malcolm was so prophetic. I mean, things that he said 50 years ago.
Right.
60 years ago.
Right.
Sound as if he said them yesterday.
Yeah.
And that's because he was just so profound and prophetic. You know, we have somebody who was able to essentially educate himself. But as we know, I mean, based upon his history and what we know about his early life, we know that he was always intelligent.
Right.
You know, when he went to school in Lansing, Michigan,
Yeah,
when he went to school, when he was the only black person in his class.
That's right.
He was the smartest.
Right.
He was the one that they always selected to be the leader of the group.
That's right.
So we knew that he had, back from then, a lot of potential. But of course, the interesting thing is it was the educational system that sent him in another direction.
Mm-hmm.
When his teacher asked him, in the autobiography of Malcolm X, the name used is Mr. Ostrowski. Mr. Ostrowski was asking all of the students what they wanted to do when they grew up.
Mm-hmm.
And Ostrowski asked Malcolm, and Malcolm said, well, I want to be a lawyer.
Right.
And Ostrowski said, well, Malcolm, you know, be realistic. You can't be a lawyer. You need to be able to do something with your hands.
Right.
You know, be a plumber. You know, be a carpenter. And Malcolm didn't take that well. And from that time on, that's when Malcolm figured he had no use for school because the school system as it was then had no use for him.
What would Malcolm say today with Donald Trump in the White House?
Well, I think the thing would not even be about Donald Trump. He would be asking us, he would be asking African people, what are you doing?
Right. Okay.
How do you fall into this particular situation?
Right.
How do you allow yourself to be in this particular kind of predicament where we have our people at this particular point, you know, gnashing their teeth and wringing their hands because of this particular...
Shouldn't he be asking all of America?
Well...
But 62 million people voted for Donald Trump.
Yeah, that's a lot. And, you know, as we reflect on it...
62 million.
And in every constituency in the white community, Donald Trump had a plurality. He won every category.
What about it being rigged? They're checking now.
Well, I mean, there's several things that come to mind.
That's what Trump said. He said it was rigged.
We know about voter suppression.
Right.
We know that since the Republicans have been attempting to try to push back on the Voting Rights Act,
right,
that in many states, not only in the South, but in the Midwest, in some of those battleground states, that there were numbers of blacks and Latinos who were not allowed to vote.
Right.
We know that.
Right.
At the same time, many of us have issues in regards to the new computerized voting system.
Right.
Because before, when we had the old voting machines, when you threw the lever, you saw that your vote was actually being tabulated right then. You could see.
Did you know that Donald Trump's son-in-law has a brother in Silicon Valley? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, those computers could have been hacked in.
And I don't know which company. I mean, it's one of the companies that is dealing with this whole process of computerized voting,
right,
that he has business interests.
Oh, he does?
Yeah, I believe he has business interests in at least one of the companies that is dealing with this question of computerized voting. So it's just a bad situation. But as Brother Malcolm said back then, it's the ballot or the bullet. And at this particular point, in terms of us understanding what Brother Malcolm was saying, because on one hand he was saying, use your vote,
right,
aim your vote like you would aim a gun. And we don't do that. We don't do that. I mean, we're just, as a people, as a community, unfortunately, we just, we're waiting for the crumbs off the table.
Well, in our younger days, we would have been gathering up arms, man, in our earlier days.
Well, listen, brother.
But not now.
I would have to say that old people and young people need to stay in shape, need to try to stay healthy. They need to be physically fit, ready for whatever happens, and they need to know something about firearms. Because guess what? White people do. The NRA supported Donald Trump. The issue in terms of the Second Amendment is a major issue in terms of white people. So here it is.
You think it'll come to that?
White people are armed, but we're not.
I mean, but it's too ridiculous. I mean,
it is ridiculous. I'm not pretending, anything in terms of, any kind of great racial war, which is, of course, what many of...
But people have too much sense.
Well, a lot of Donald Trump supporters are seeking that. When you look at the neo-Nazis, when you look at the Nazi group, when you look at some of these organizations, one of the things that they talk about race war.
But
that's what they talk about.
Well, there's no winning that one. I mean, I feel like with Sessions as Attorney General, I mean, that's definitely a Klansman.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if we look at the way laws have been actually dealt with, gun control became an issue in this country when the Black Panther Party went to Sacramento and went into the state.
And Reagan was governor.
State office building with guns.
And Reagan was the governor.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden it was like, well, we have to do something about gun control. We don't want these people actually going ahead and having guns. And there's film of the Panthers in Oakland on patrol with their guns, confronted by police when the laws changed, saying that you are now no longer allowed to carry those guns openly. That was done for us, okay? But then the Black Panther Party, that was where gun control started.
But now you have white people doing exactly what the Panthers did.
Very openly. I mean, if you remember, starting back with the Tea Party, you had folks openly carrying weapons at conferences, at rallies, all over. At Trump rallies, you saw the same thing. Now, of course, this is an interesting phenomenon because a white person with a gun is seen as exercising his Second Right Amendment. Mm-hmm. A black person with a gun is seen as a criminal. We've seen this so many different kinds of times. We have around the country police officers, black police officers in plain clothes or off duty, taking police action, and they're perceived as being a criminal because, well, look, it's a black person with a gun, has to be a criminal. All right, and in many instances, these black police officers lost their lives. They were shot by white police officers because the perception was they were a criminal. So on one level, that perception has to be changed. Philandro Castillo, The brother who was licensed to have a gun.
Oh, right.
Who had the gun in his car.
Right.
He's licensed to have the gun.
Right.
But the minute a white police officer sees a gun at a black person, the idea is that he's a criminal.
Well,
He's
that's
gotta
one of the cases where the officer was indicted.
be. Yeah. Well, yeah, you know, as we know, in
One
terms
out
of
of-
indictments,
Out of
indictments and convictions are two different things.
okay.
Very often, an indictment can actually be brought down, but then what is going to happen next? Is there going to be some kind of conviction?
Well, they have to do something about this one.
Well, we say that.
But with Sessions in there, what happens then?
Well, if you remember also, Donald Trump went to the Fraternal Order of Police, which is the National Police Organization, which represents police officers and police organizations, police unions around the country. And he said, I support you 1,000%.
Okay.
He didn't say 100% or I just support you. He said, I support you 1,000%. And in turn, the Fraternal Order of Police actually went ahead and endorsed Donald Trump. So you have a lot to think about. You know, we have a whole lot to think about. And we have to understand that in terms of law enforcement, it's not a matter of there being, you know, like a bad apple. You know, that's the argument always made. Well, there's only one individual. Oh, it's a bad person. It's the system. It's the entire system of policing and law enforcement in this country, which many people don't know, that the first organized law enforcement in this country was the slave patrols.
Right. Exactly.
So it starts there,
So
and
it's
it
going to
moves
become
forward here.
Well, that's what we're going to have now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to an extent, we have. When police are in our communities doing things in New York City like Impact, they're doing some of the same things that slave patrols, stop and frisk. Slave patrols, that's what slave patrols did. They stopped and frisked.
Our mayor says that will never come back here.
Well,
He promises.
well, he's not going to be the mayor forever.
Well, we got an election next year.
Yeah.
That's right.
And, I mean, people would say that Mayor de Blasio is a weakened candidate. You know, he
why
is
so?
not as strong when he first came in. And that is because of things that happened under Bratton. Bratton was the police commissioner. His naming of Bratton as a police commissioner in the first place. You know, several things that have happened. The school system, nothing has changed. Nothing has gotten better. So, you know, this idea of him being so progressive, etc., it hasn't come to fruition in his mayoral.
Do you see any good coming from his being mayor?
You know, it's really hard to say. I mean, you see the possibility, maybe, of affordable housing. You know, you see some starts in regards to possible affordable housing. But at the same time, you see so much luxury housing coming up.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you see housing going up all around. You look at a borough like Brooklyn. Brooklyn is being totally transformed. And apartments are going up, and you look at these apartments, and you just, that's what you can do. You can look at them. Because you know that most likely you cannot afford to live in those apartments.
Right.
So it's like, how can that be? And then, of course, the question is, who's going to live in all of these apartments? You know, we know people are coming from foreign countries.
Gentrification.
They're investing. Then, of course, we have the gentry. We have people who are coming, you know, from the suburbs into the city. We've got people who are coming from other parts of the country into the city. But what is to then be done with those people who already live here? And the transformation, you know, does not necessarily bode to be a good transformation. We have to see. Time will tell.
Well, I just want to run a little piece from Yusef Salaam on Donald Trump.
Okay.
I just want to give my public a little idea of the depth of Trump and how he's harmed New York City. He's a New Yorker, and we have to take account that New York is full of hustlers, and I mean, this is the way we're raised in this town. So Trump is nothing but an evidence of what you happen when you get on the top level in New York. But this is some of the wounds he's left behind with the Central Park Five. And listen to Yusef. We tried to get him on the Skype today, but he wasn't available.
Donald Trump then comes out. And Donald Trump, a common citizen, he takes his own money, pays for newspaper space in New York City's main newspapers. And he calls for the reinstatement of the death penalty specifically for the Central Park jogger case. There were other folks who were chiming in, and they were saying things like, you know, if we took the eldest one of them, Corey Wise, and we hung him from a tree in Central Park, and if we took the others and we horsewhipped them, maybe our park would be safe again. This is what, you know, like, this whole process that they put us through was so amazing that when I tell young people about it today, and my mentor, of course, is definitely Malcolm X. But when I say Nelson Mandela, because people always ask me, they say, well, you know, had I not known you was in prison, I would have never known. Like your demeanor, your presence, the way that you carry yourself. I've seen people who come home from prison, you don't even look like that. And I said, well, you know, Mandiba used to say, to be angry, to be bitter, is like drinking poison and expecting your enemies to die. They don't care what they do to you and how they do it. They're like, man, I mean, I'm sure Donald Trump is sleeping on his plush king-size, you know, custom-made beds with the pillowcases and all of that stuff that has 8,000 thread counts. I'm sure, you know, somebody wrote in one of the papers, they said when they found out that we were innocent, you would hope and wonder that we would have received some sort of apology. And they said this thing about apologizing was the dust for one of his maids to sweep up. The only apology, people always ask me, they say, have you ever received an apology? And the only apology that we have ever received, the only apology we have ever received was from one of the courtroom artists that used to draw us. You know, we went run over by a few different trains, and we looking, we see some light, some trains and some cars that run us over. But we think that this is the justice coming. You know.
So with that, I'm surely packed the jail, like the slave ships when they sail, but they don't know. My people was made to go. My people all say tell. My people got more people to give. More people, more sisters and brothers. My people stay strong as an ours. My people will never fail. My people will always remain with a story to tell. My people was made to adore.
Yusef Salaam. Quite impressive. And that's, he spent, what, 7, 8 years in prison?
Yeah, at least. I mean, I can't even remember the exact number. And interestingly enough, in terms of Yusef was one of those 5 who never confessed to anything.
And he still spent the time.
Yeah, yet and still, he was still convicted.
And his mother's a school teacher.
Yeah. Yeah, Sister Sharon Salam.
Beautiful woman.
And, you know, many people maintain the innocence of these young men from the beginning.
Right.
State Senator Bill Perkins, Brother Ilambe Barath, many others.
Sharpton was in there.
They went ahead and maintained their innocence throughout. And then, of course, to finally have them exonerated, to have the truth finally come out, I mean, it's good. But, of course, the damage is done. Not only that, if you remember, Michael Bloomberg, mayor, did not want to settle that case. That case was only settled when Mayor de Blasio became the mayor.
Oh, that's right.
That's right.
That's right.
He refused to settle it. So, you know, what we have to understand.
I forgot that.
Yes.
I forgot.
He forgot to settle that case. He did not settle that case. He didn't forget to settle it. He consciously did not settle the case. But that was one of the things. And there was no admission of any wrongdoing by the police by the criminal justice system anywhere, all of the laws that were broken, all of the procedures that were violated, there was no admission of any wrongdoing. And several of the people involved on the police or criminal justice side have said that they still believe that these young men had something to do with it.
Linda Feinstein, she wrote how many books?
Yeah, and got famous on this, of course, right? But, you know, we see, you know, how these things actually go ahead and take place. It's difficult, but we have to go back and we have to remember that Donald Trump had called for the death penalty.
Right.
And wanted the death penalty implemented in regards to these young people. I mean, imagine if some of his nonsense had actually been taken seriously. Because as we know, very often Donald Trump has been engaged in nonsense, whether it's calling for the death penalty as far as the Central Park Five, requesting to see President Barack Obama's birth certificate,
My goodness.
asking to see his transcripts.
Right.
You know, the nerve of these people. But, I mean, this is who we're dealing with.
So what are we looking forward to?
Well, I think one of the major things is that, first of all, number one, I think all progressive people have to organize. Okay, no matter who they are. I think that one of the issues in terms of white progressives, they don't do the kind of organizing in their community that they need to do.
We see protesters all out there now.
Yeah, protests, but now that's after the fact. I'm talking about the kind of grassroots organizing that needs to take place, not after an election, but prior to an election.
Well, I have
and
an
all along.
announcement. I have an announcement, National Action Network, if you want to go to Washington, January 14th. We have a huge march. You call National Action Network, 212-690-3070, and see what happens.
Yeah.
Join our march, January 14th. We'll talk more about this.
Right, that's important.
In between.
That's important. But, you know, what I'm saying is, you know, that these white progressives, they need to organize in their community. I mean, many of the people who voted for Donald Trump were their relatives, you know, were their mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, uncles, whomever. And very often, this community does not do that kind of grassroots organizing. In our community, we have to get reorganized. One of the things I've said, you know, we survived Nixon, but we were organized. We survived Reagan, but we were organized. And my fear in regards to a Trump presidency was, we're not organized. Because right now, our level of organization is low. We see this all the time.
But with this serious threat to our, you know, humanization, I mean, it's out the window.
Yeah,
'Cause I
well,
don't believe this man is. Do you think? I had a revelation. I thought maybe that Trump would be touched by the hand of God once he got into the White House and see the light and suddenly become overcome by his the ability not to make money because I don't think he'll be able to get through half the shams he's performed in the past being president, because they're going to be on top of him. I don't think he's ever realized how much of under the microscope he is now.
but you know what? His tone changed slightly.
When he
if you
talked
remember.
to Barack.
Yes, when he went to the White House.
Right.
And had that conversation. He came out and he looked quite chastened.
He was surprised Barack was a gentleman and didn't stab him in the chest as he's
But not
stood
only
there.
that, I'm quite certain that President Obama told him some
Ran it down.
things
Ran
that
it
he was
down.
not necessarily ready for.
That's right.
Okay? Today, as we're talking to our audience here, Donald Trump went to the New York Times
Yeah, on the
and
through the back door.
interviewed, and this is supposed to be an on-the-record interview. And I would think, I will not be surprised if many of the things that Donald Trump ran on, the things that he said when he was candidate Trump, is they're going to be quite different now that he's President Trump.
Well, we know he's not going to lock her up.
He's not going to lock her up.
He's
Not going to build a wall. You know, I mean, so many different kinds of things are not going to happen. You know, looking in terms of not going to repeal the Affordable Health Care Act.
There's certain qualities of the act that he appreciates.
Yeah. And
You think Barack might have talked him into that?
I think
20
that,
million. You can't throw 20 million people in the
Yeah.
street.
And I think that was probably part of their conversation in regards to him beginning.
It had to be.
Trump understanding
Right.
the depth and breadth of what he's gotten into.
Right?
You know, he's over his head. I mean, we know
Yeah,
that.
I really believe he didn't think he'd be elected.
I think initially that was the case. You know, as we know, it didn't turn out because he energized what appears to be his base, and that's white people.
Do you believe, did you believe, what's so surprising to me is that the amount of people, I mean, I was Pollyanna, but I know there's racism in America, but nobody, I mean, but the campaign he ran, from the primaries to the major election, I mean, he was so low-life.
Yeah.
I didn't believe 62 million people could actually vote for a man like that.
But you know what? I mean, part of it has to do with perception. I mean, as an example, if we look at crime in this country, white people commit the majority of crime in this country in practically every crime category.
Okay.
Okay? But the perception is that black people commit this crime. It's not true.
Okay.
You can go every year. The Department of Justice and the FBI put out something called the Uniform Crime Reports, UCR.
Oh, I've heard it, yeah.
UCR.
Professor Small brought that up years ago.
And you look at this, and it has arrests broken down by race.
Right.
And white people are arrested in many instances in certain categories. I mean, if you talk like for drugs, if you talk like for intoxication, I mean, things like that, far beyond their numbers in this country.
Well, we don't have the population to keep up with that.
No, not at all, not at all. But the perception of many people is that black people commit all the crime in this country. Let's look at drugs right now. Heroin addiction. It is so big in the white suburbs, it's a crisis.
Yeah, I know. That's amazing.
It's now been actually called a national health crisis.
And mainly in these major states, Michigan,
New York.
Ohio.
New York, you can go upstate. You can go to Rochester. You can go to Schenectady. It's
Upstate,
a
yeah.
major. You can probably go out partially on the island, you know, out on Long Island, and you will find that there are pockets. First, they started with opioids. First, they started
Yeah.
with prescription drugs.
Right.
And then they moved on to heroin. And you've got
In this day and age.
young white people going ahead and overdosing on heroin. Let me tell you something. I mean, this is interesting in terms of the way that it's been treated. Police officers in New York City have been given a heroin overdose antidote called Narcan.
Oh, yeah, I've heard
They
of that.
carry it around on their belts.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
Now let's go back to the middle to late 1960s when heroin flooded our communities.
Oh, yeah.
Harlem,
Yeah.
Bed-Stuy, you know, through Chicago, black Chicago. You look at when black people were overdosing, it's just like they're junkies.
But that was planned genocide.
Of course. But, you know,
And as
we
it
were
was with
junkies.
crack,
Yeah.
too.
You know, we were junkies. Nobody cared about it. It wasn't necessarily a health issue. It was a crime issue. You know, that's when the war on drugs began. And the war on drugs was merely a war on black people, black and Latino people, black and brown people. That's been what the war of drugs is. It's always been that.
Right.
War on drugs is a war on us. Okay? So you see that. And now that white people are the majority of those who are going ahead and taking heroin and being affected by that, now they want us to be kind and nice. You know, treat them, you know, with some kind of respect. Treat them in a humane fashion. Don't call them junkies. And of course, as I said, it is now looked at as being a major health crisis. They didn't look at heroin addiction as a major health crisis back in the mid-60s.
Well, it wasn't publicized like it is now.
No.
We didn't have the major media functions that we have now.
And I mean, of course, the interesting thing is that, who would have known that young white men and women would be going ahead and gravitating to this drug in the way that they have actually gravitated?
So these are the people who actually voted for Trump.
In
Is
part.
that what you're saying?
I'm saying...
The opiate in the Midwest.
I'm saying, I'm saying that there is a demographic, a
But
white
they're looking for
demographic.
jobs. Yeah, and what about the people looking for jobs?
And they're in despair.
But
Part of that despair...
Trump can't bring all these jobs back because they're low. They're jobs that have been taken away mainly because of the computer.
Yeah. And not only that, all of the jobs that have been exported to places all around the world.
Which
Most
Trump
of those
helped
jobs,
do that.
most of those jobs are not coming back.
Okay.
Many of those jobs are skilled jobs. But think about it.
So what happens after all these people, 62 million of them, find out that Trump is really a chump and he's a jive dude from New York?
Well, let's see.
Which he is. I mean, we know him because we're New Yorkers.
I expect there to be a lot of disappointment in terms of Trump supporters, and I guess we'll have to see what happens.
But he's hopped on the bandwagon of infrastructure, saying to the tune of trillions of dollars now. Of course, they blocked Obama when he came up with it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, here's the problem. You can't cut taxes and
do
pay for
that.
infrastructure. Right. You can't cut taxes and pay for infrastructure improvement. You can't do that.
Well, another thing that people don't realize is that Reagan came out in 1980 with let's make America great again, all right? But he cut taxes. I mean, he increased taxes more so than any other president that we in the 20th century.
Yeah. But at the same time,
people don't know that.
Yeah, and if you look at Reaganomics, Reaganomics was an abject failure.
Okay.
The deficit increased during Reagan's presidency.
Right.
Unemployment increased during Reagan's presidency. I mean, a lot of different kinds of things.
But he
really
did
happened.
raise taxes.
He raised taxes at different times, but again, it depends who the taxes are going to be raised on.
But there was a decade of greed. Stock market soared during the 80s.
Yeah.
Rich people were happy.
Oh, yeah. And rich people will be happy again because, I mean, think about this. Donald Trump ran, and as his, at least some of his tax returns were, made public in regards to, what he did, it was like, well, this guy probably didn't pay taxes for 18, 20 years.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Now think about that.
That's amazing.
That means that every year, we as citizens pay more tax in 1 year than Donald Trump did in 20. How can you vote for somebody like that?
They don't really know. They don't know.
How can you vote? He's talking about, I'm going to cut taxes. He already cut his taxes.
He's a
his
good
taxes
salesman.
were already cut.
He's a good salesman. I mean, he's a New Yorker. I always say that. He's a New Yorker. We're the biggest cons in the world.
And listen, his shows, The Apprentice, first when it was The Apprentice, then it was The Celebrity Apprentice and all of that. It gave him some national and international notoriety that previously he did not have.
Can you imagine how his ego has soared? I mean, he's delusional. I mean.
And narcissistic. We know this.
I mean, damn.
We know this. And of course, the problem is, what happens when you have somebody in this critical international position who is, in fact, an egotist and a narcissist. All right? Because he'll do things. Just think about it. Vice President Pence, or Vice President-elect Pence, goes to see the musical Hamilton on Broadway.
Yeah. That was a trip.
And some of the people boo him, some of the people cheer him, and at the end, when he's leaving, the cast makes a statement. They made a sincere, profound statement. Pence didn't have a problem with it.
Right.
But what did Trump do?
Thin skin.
Got on Twitter and started talking about, oh, well, they need to apologize.
Yeah.
Apologize for what? What are they apologizing
And Pence said that's freedom. That shows you what he told his kids. That's what freedom looks like.
for? Yeah. And, coming from Pence, who is, a neocon in his
So
own
what
right.
happens? What happens after Donald gets impeached, and he's got all these people in the White House, Banner and the rest of them, and Pence takes over.
Pence would be the vice president.
Pence would be the president.
He would be the president then. I mean, yeah, he would end up being the president if, in fact,
All right.
he was, if Donald Trump was impeached, yes. That
All
would
right,
be
we
the
have
case.
Doc here. Doc has finally. I think he's in somewhere about.
We gotta get
But
him
I'm
ready.
going to run something on the alt-right. I want you to see these Hitler's signs.
Sig Heil and all of that. That's right. Nazi
Hitler's
salutes.
in the White House.
Nazi
Hitler's-
salutes.
Nazi salutes. Run that clip while we get Dr. Jeffries on.
Hail Trump! Hail our people! Hail victory! No one will honor us for losing gracefully. No one mourns the great crimes committed against us. For us, it is conquer or die. The mainstream media, or perhaps we should refer to them in the original German, Lügenpresse. It's not just that they are leftist and cucks. It's not just that many are genuinely stupid. Indeed, one wonders if these people are people at all. Or instead, soulless Gollum, animated by some dark power to repeat whatever talking point John Oliver stated the night before. To be white is to be a striver, a crusader, an explorer, and a conqueror. We build, we produce, we go upward. And we recognize the central lie of American race relations. We don't exploit other groups. We don't gain anything from their presence. They need us and not the other way around. Within the very blood in our veins as children of the sun lies the potential for greatness. That is the great struggle we are called to. We are not meant to live in shame and weakness and disgrace. We were not meant to beg for moral validation from some of the most despicable creatures to ever populate the planet. We were meant to overcome all of it, because that is natural and normal for us. The press has clearly decided to double down and wage war against the legitimacy of Trump and the continued existence of white America. But they are really opening up the door for us. America was, until this past generation, a white country designed for ourselves and our posterity. It is our creation. It is our inheritance. And it belongs to us.
Interesting. And this is what Trump has brought us. Welcome to the show, Doc.
It's
I
always
know that's
a pleasure.
hard to take.
Always a pleasure to be on the airways. Always a pleasure to be with you on these airways.
Well, we didn't get Hillary. We got Donald Trump.
You got Hillary.
Hillary.
You got hell on steroids. However,
Did you hear this? I mean, how does that sit with you, Don?
No, in other words, let's be
I mean, they haven't been as brazen to bring
let's
it
be
out
real.
like
You need a systems analysis.
I know,
tell
that's
you
why
all
you're
the
here,
time
Don.
and tell your organization and tell the audience. You can get, if you don't have a systems analysis, then you can get lost in understanding. Trump is just another manifestation of a system that was founded not on freedom, justice, and equality, but injustice, inequality, and death and destruction. This land is not the Sun People's land that this brother was talking about. It is the Sun People's land of the Native Americans.
Yeah.
And they are no longer here because millions suffered genocide in order to have this land available for white exploitation. And then when the white colonists came, such as the Virginia colony in 1607, they tried to make it with the Native Americans. And when the Native Americans realized they were not honest people, they moved away from them. And the colony almost died from starvation. And then in 1619, on the horizon comes a Dutch man of war that had ripped off the Spanish slaving operation. And it had 20 Africans. And they saved the first experiment in colonization in Virginia. And those 20 Africans were considered indentured servants like other people who came, Irish and whatnot. But America, the road not taken in the system of white supremacy, instead of allowing African peoples to be a part of the indentured process, they institutionalized permanent enslavement for life for African peoples. This country was not founded on any freedom, justice, and equality. The colonies were not founded on any people who were looking for, they needed us. And then after they planted all these colonies up and down the coast, you got to the point where the slaving situation was so profitable that they wanted to rip off the British domination over the slave system and establish their own slaving operation. America was founded on slavery. And so until we can get and understand that Washington, Jefferson, and Monroe, the founding fathers, were the Trump's predecessors. Trump is just another version of white male domination. And when the nation was founded, it was founded on these rich white men with property and power. There was no power for poor white people without property. There was no power for most white people who were women. And then they came up with the three-fifths clause. And see, that's why I tell Jesse, you got to get the history. Stop talking about some damn three-fifths clause that we had three-fifths rights. We had no rights. And then they put a set-aside. Not a set-aside in terms of black folks getting something. They put a set-aside to continue enslaving for the next 20 years. They would end the slave trade in 1808, but they still would keep enslavement. So at every point, there's a myth of America's greatness. The greatness was founded on the blood of the Africans that suffered and the Native Americans who were killed.
Right. And one of the things that has to be pointed out is when this guy, Spencer talks about how these white people did everything. White people, when they came here, couldn't do nothing. When you look at corn, who cultivated corn? Who taught them how to cultivate corn?
That's right.
Rice.
That's right.
Okay.
Africans.
When they came from the north, they came from a northern cold climate here. They didn't know anything about cultivating rice. It was Africans who went ahead and taught them to cultivate rice. So when you talk about even the idea that they were able to go ahead and move into agriculture, the entire slave system was an agricultural system. It was to go ahead and exploit our labor, African people's labor, to go ahead and create agriculture, which these people still at that particular point knew very, very little about. So without that institution, without the slave trade and that particular crime, white people would not have been able to exist in North America.
And the white migration that comes in after the Civil War, in the 1890s and 1900, America was already an established operation with land taken from Native Americans and building on that land by peoples of color. Not only the Africans, but when we talked about railroad building and whatnot, you got to put the Chinese in the middle of this. So what whiteness? It's a myth. And we should have been able to say that. But we were not able to because we're looking for an accommodation to fit into the system. But now it has been revealed. This is nothing new. We survived the genocide of the Native Americans. We survived the enslavement of Africans. We have survived the semi-enslavement when they gave us the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment. It wasn't real. After the death of Abraham Lincoln, they put a Southerner in as the President of the United States, and after these rights that we were supposed to have, they put in the Supreme Court, the Tony Supreme Court, who ruled in the Dred Scott decision that black folks had no rights that white people needed to respect. And so that Tony Supreme Court, after the Civil Rights Act of 1875, by 1883, they were voting against black people and giving our rights to the corporate structure, which was born at the same time as my grandfather, who was born in Georgia in 1868. The year before, Rockefeller birthed Standard Oil, which became the prototype of the corporate structure. And so instead of the African peoples, my people, getting an end of enslavement, they got neo-slavery. Instead of them getting citizenship rights, the citizenship rights were given to the corporate person. Freedom, equal protection of the laws, privileges and immunities of laws, due process laws didn't go to my grandfather and his wife and his brothers and sisters. It went to the corporate structure. So by 1900, a monster had been created. Jay Gould, J.P. Morgan, Rockefeller, Harriman, and they controlled the nation. Worse than any Trump can possibly control. They had whole senators, whole states that they had purchased. So Trump is just another damn version of the shit that we've gone through, and we need to wake up and understand it. Get our thing together.
All right.
The robber barons.
That's right.
They call them barons, but they call them robbers.
Robber barons.
So let's start with the first lie of the 21st century, which was 9/11. We all know that was an inside job. Now, you go past 9/11, you come up to Bush and Cheney, and we have another abomination, Iraq. And now we come up to the fall of Wall Street, 2008, 2008, and Barack Obama comes in, savior. Saved Wall Street, saved the economy,
Saved the oil industry.
And they let him do nothing. His first suggestion was infrastructure. But the Congress, the do-nothing Congress for the next 8 years. Now that Trump's in 2017, we have the first thing on the books is $1 trillion, $2 trillion in infrastructure to bring the job, to give people work. Now, we all know that Obama came up with that, and we see that Trump is not going to completely dismiss Obamacare. So where are we? And how do we stick to our guns as far as that's concerned, as far as looking for reparation in our own way of grabbing what we've accomplished already? We don't want to go back to that system that we just left. Okay?
First of all, in 2008, President Obama had a majority in the House of Representatives and Senate.
For 2 years.
And he did not, in his seeking of bipartisanship,
Right. Exactly.
he did not go ahead and move the mandate that the people had essentially delivered to him. Okay? We have to say that. I mean, that's one of the criticisms
he
very
had
clearly.
filibustering at his peak at those days.
But at the same time, when it mattered and the majorities existed in those particular bodies, the movement that should have taken place as far as legislatively, it didn't happen. What we have to remember is that most of the things that we as African people have accomplished have nothing to do with the electoral system at all.
That's right.
It has nothing to do with electing a president. It has nothing to do very often with electing local officials. It has to do with us organizing and doing what we need to do as a people, setting our agenda right now as an example. What is our agenda?
Yeah.
Do we have an African agenda? Do we have a black agenda?
Well, let's talk about what happened in Newark.
Well, we were blessed to have that process take place. It was the fourth conference dealing with the state of the black race. I was able to go to all of them.
What was it? The state of the black race.
State of the black world.
Okay.
And this was the fourth example. And each time it's after an election, purposely designed so we could do an assessment in terms of what is happening politically, and then how should we move politically. So we couldn't have had a better timing for this gathering of hundreds, if not 1,000 of us for those 5 days. And we have to thank the Institute of the Black World 21st Century, its leadership around Dr. Ron Daniels and the host of others for what they did. We had a chance to forget about Trump and the moaning and groaning, and to talk about actually how do you organize.
That's right.
And how do you organize models of economics, models of education, models of controlling your own business. I opened up the first session after Danny Glover made a fantastic presentation on Wednesday, was followed by Sister Barbara King, who is the person in Newark that links up Ghana and West Africa, Africa to the city, and then I followed. And I ended by saying, we need to understand that they're looking for us to react in our traditional ways. A march here, a march there. We need to take America's juggler is its economics. And Black Friday, which is coming up after Thanksgiving, is that time where they say the profit margin in the American economy is going into the black. We need to really make it a Black Friday for African peoples. And instead of spending and getting into this consumer insanity that they have us in, save our money. Do not spend it. And keep it in your own pockets or in your own economic endeavors, not just through Friday, not just through Christmas, but after you do a little bit of sharing with doing Kwanzaa, then you go on through New Year's, and you go up to January the 20th. Save your money, that trillion plus 300 billion that you represent, and see what the program will be. People say, wait a minute, they're waking up. They're talking about putting money, saving it. They're talking about model cities for their community. They're talking about reparations for themselves. Internal reparations is something we control. And that's how we deal with our wealth and how we deal with our structures and how we deal with movement. External reparations should be thrown out there as a scare tactic to have them go into a frenzy. We can control into how we spend our money, for what purposes, not for buying hair, $2,000 hair, and you already got a couple of $2,000 hairs hanging in your closet, and hundreds of dollars for sneakers. Save your money. That's the message. And not save it just for one day. You're the margin of profit of the American system. Don't buy no cars. Don't buy no big houses. Save your money and save it right through January the 20th. At that celebration they're going to have. And then don't march up and down protesting the celebration. Tell black people, save your money. You're going to build your own institutions. You're going to set up your own banks. Just like Martin Luther King said when he realized that economics was the juggler. He cut himself from the civil rights movement and said, I'm going alone. If only me. I'm going down to Washington, and we're going to stand there to let the folks know that it's about the Native Americans, even the poor whites he had sympathy for. But it's about black people using their money not for the worst. We are the most ridiculous consumers of wealth in the history of the world. We need to change that. And that was the declaration. It's nation time. Do something for the African nation and link it with other African nations in the Caribbean, in Brazil, in South America, and on the African continent.
Now, along with that, my view as always is that we need some targeted boycotts. It's not enough to just generally boycott. That we need to go ahead and specifically look at certain corporations and make sure that we boycott them.
That's right.
Because then we can actually measure our impact. If we do it and we say, well, just $1 trillion less was spent, I mean, it will hurt everybody, but we need to decide who we want to hurt specifically.
That's right.
I mean, that's very, very important. The other thing is that we need to go ahead, I mean, many of us have always believed in Ujamaa, the idea of cooperative economics. And we need to see what kinds of cooperative economic projects we can begin to go ahead and...
Do we have any?
Yes, we do, and that's what the model. We spent one day, a day and a half, coming up with models of economic cooperation, development banks, models that are already in place. So that was the beauty. This was not just a conference to be conferencing. This was a conference to produce some action, and it was needed at this time. And when they were talking about nation time, and I've been to more conferences than anybody I know. I started when I was 13 years old. I'm 80 now. I've been conferencing for 68 years. And this was the one that really grabbed what we needed. There was a political dimension that was understood. There was an economic dimension and a cultural dimension. And to have the final presentation with Dr. Malana Karanga giving a sweep of history and our history, and then having Minister Louis Farrakhan feed off of that presentation, that dynamic every black person should see. To see the Nation of Islam stepping back and listening to a presentation of the African nationalist movement through America, and then having him do an analysis, an enormous analysis on what we need to do, and then having him make a commitment to support financially what was done, and to declare that not a penny was asked of the Institute of the Black World 21st Century. They came at their own cost, they brought their own cooks, they brought their own, and so there's another consciousness that was in it. Not a dime was asked. They brought a group of 10 to 20 people, including his own cook, and they donated money to start the process of how we're going to put these models in place.
Okay.
So it was really, for me, I had turned my TV off for 4 days after I knew where that election was going. I didn't want to hear no more analysis, no more coming from this think tank, no more coming. We now have the obligation to do what we've hesitated to do, to form a nation within a nation, and then link that nation up through our corporate structures and international trade agreements with Brazil, with the Caribbean, with Africa.
Right. And one of the things that many of us have always advocated, that we need our own foreign policy that has nothing to do with the foreign policy of the United States.
Right.
That many of us have had the opportunity to travel around the world and be treated as if, in fact, we were representatives of governments. Right. And, you know, that is profound, you know, especially for us African people. I mean, you don't think about that. But it's important, and we need to continue to do that, and we need to roll these particular models out to the masses of people so that they can participate.
Is
and
there
the
some sort of
which was so clear that you cannot expect the enemy of your people to educate your people to power.
Okay.
That we have to take control of the educational system from before the womb, before the young lady is even with child, that she is being educated for nation building, for family building, for community building. And that we can't put youngsters in these classes where now you have a declared war against us. Before they played with it. Now it's declared. So we have to say, we're going to control locally. Yes, you say the federal government is too heavy into the education system. It should be at the level of states. Good. We want that. So the community control that we've been demanding for years now will be real. And we'll control the curriculum. We'll let us know and the world know that we are the first people, not sitting in darkness waiting for some white folks to bring us the light. We created and fathomed the light and brought it to the human family.
And white people need to know that, too. Okay, that's part of the issue in terms of the education system. You know, these people like Spencer and Donald Trump, they're miseducated. They're misinformed.
We've got 20 seconds. See, Doc, you always get here late. See, right when you get hot, it gives us 20 minutes.
For the movement, and we will be
Power to the people.
at the
God
National
bless.
Black Theater. We'll be meeting
God in
on
me, love the God
Saturday.
in you. Stay tuned. We'll get Doc back on time. God bless.
National Black Theater, Saturday, 6 to 10.
We're gone.